Okay guys, welcome back to part 2 of the How to Fly the Airbus tutorial series. We're in a cold and dark A320 flight deck. Plane's completely dead, so let's go about getting this plane started and ready to fly. So first things first, let's come up to the overhead panel here as I jump through my easy dock views. You'll see you'll need to turn on your battery first, some kind of electrical power. So turn on each of your batteries, and then you can see by default external power here is already available. It's connected, so we will turn that on so we have a sustainable source of power. Once the aircraft is powered, the nav and the logo light have to be on at all times. So turn on your nav light and your logo light. And you can go ahead and arm, one click here, arm the emergency exit lights. Those need to be armed. At this point, you need to align your ADIRSs, or ADIRs. The order in which to do this, you need to set them to nav, would be left, right, and then center. So one click on the left, wait for it to come off the battery, one click on the right, off battery, and then one click in the center. On the center ADIRS, and those will begin to align. So let those do their thing. You need those. They're like the IRSs in the Boeing. They essentially use an accelerometer as well as other navigational or location equipment to tell the aircraft where it is in the world so that it can fly a proper routing. Once you've done that, you should get some ground connections going. So come over to the First Officer's MCDU, go to Ground Services. You want your cones down at this point, you want your chocks set. This is done by default. I like to connect external power and get rid of the GPU. If you want the GPU instead of external power, that's fine, but this is personal preference. You need either the GPU or external power. Have one of these connected, you don't need both. At this point, I like to go to load and fuel, and I'll initialize the load sheet. Now if you remember, in part 1, we got load and fuel, and we set our 0 fuel weight, and we entered fuel from PFPX. If you click init load sheet, so initialize load sheet, it will autofill this information with everything that we calculated. So our CG's 25%, that's correct. 102 passengers, that's correct. And at this point, if you want to board and do your cargo and fuel, you can click these, and it will, take some amount of time to do it. I normally just do an instant load, which will put it on immediately. You can do this at your own discretion, at your own preference. If you want to wait a little longer and have it more realistic, you can do a slow load by clicking each of these individually. If you want to do it all at once, which I do, you can do an instant load, like so. And you'll see now we're totally boarded. Again, if you have GSX and you want to, sorry, you might be able to hear my dog barking. If you have GSX and you want to open certain doors, by all means go ahead and open doors and allow GSX to board you. Again, I don't really use GSX for catering or boarding, so I'm going to close our doors, but again, doors are at your discretion. Just make sure they're closed before you push back and get ready to depart. So our doors are now closed. We've boarded our passengers and our cargo. We're in good shape. What you can do now is come up to the overhead. Take me a minute to get there. You can turn on your fuel pumps since you have fuel on board. These are set off by default. Turn them on. And then you can turn on your passenger signs since your passengers are on board. Seat belts and no smoking signs. Presumably you'd want both of those on here on the ground. Then down to the pedestal, you can turn on your radio panel if you're going to be on VATSIM or using some ATC service or software. I'm flying offline, I'm not using VATSIM, so I'm just going to put 122.8 as a matter of habit. You don't have to do this unless you're using some form of air traffic control. Down here on the squawk panel, on the transponder, same thing. You don't have to touch this, but just as a matter of habit, I'm going to put in default IFR, which is 2200 in the US. And then if I can find jump. Okay, so our pedestal is set. We have our squawk in. We have our radio panel tuned. We're boarded. We have fuel. And at this stage, if you're flying in Europe, you can leave this on hectopascals. I like to turn it to inches of mercury. So I will flip that over since we're flying in the US. And you'll now want to turn on some displays. So you'll turn, as you can see here, this wheel right over here controls the brightness on the PFD. I'm going to turn up the PFD so we have a display there, we can see it. This right knob will control the ND, and then the inner knob, just behind it, controls the weather radar, so I'll turn that up slightly. And then these two knobs here in the middle will control your ECAM. So your upper ECAM, and you'll brighten that up. And then your lower ECAM, and you'll turn that up. Obviously, you need these displays on in order to fly the aircraft. Once you've done that, if you're going to be on an RNAV, you can mess here. Don't worry about this. I don't know why I'm already jumping to that. Let's not worry about that for the time being. At this point, get right into the MCDU and start the flight planning. So make sure that this looks correct, the engine variant is correct. I'm going to select the second nav data because that first one is out of date, so we now have correct nav data 1510. And you'll go to initialization and you'll initialize. If you have a company route, feel free to enter your company route. If not, don't bother. I'm going to show you step by step how to do it. So we're going from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Enter that into the from to. If you have an alternate, feel free to put it in. We don't have one, so don't bother. You can enter your, you can align the IRS. I know you started that process with the ADIRU, or ADIRS, ADIRS rather, up on the overhead. You need to click this in the FMS, or in the MCDU rather. I'm still stuck on the NGX. This is an MCDU. You need to click that in order to properly have the IRS align within the flight computer. Flight number. Enter your flight number. We're Virgin America Flight 338, so call sign is Redwood 338. Actually, that's not correct. What was the call sign? I've missed it. I still have I have it on another desktop of an old an old flight, the NGX tutorial actually. I have American 338 written down. Let me real quickly check that call sign, just so that we have that and can use the proper call sign. You'd enter it here, your flight number. This isn't going to affect how the aircraft flies, but it's nice to have in there. Keep scrolling. Here we go. It's Redwood 474. Insert that. Cost index. Again, this is all about fuel efficiency. A lower number means you're going to be burning less fuel, but moving at a slower rate. A higher number means you're going to be burning more fuel, but arriving quicker. Up to you. I use 35 at all times in the Airbus. Cruising flight level. You should have wrote this down earlier. We're going up to flight level 290. And then if you jump over one page here, click the right arrow, there's going to be various fuel calculations. All you need to fill in is the block fuel. So come up here, and you'll see it's 5.3, which comes out to roughly that 11,700 pounds that we entered. Something to note, in the fuel planner and the load planner for the Airbus, even if you have that set to thousands of pounds, which we did when we put that in the aircraft itself it always defaults to kilograms. This is about 11,700 pounds of fuel. It goes in properly, it just displays in kilos, not pounds. So write down your block fuel in kilograms, 5.3. And insert that here. Once you've done that, you can go to the flight plan page, and you can enter your flight plan. Now, if you had airways that you were tracking, or if you had direct fixes, you could insert them here. You could enter whatever fix you had into the empty spots, into the empty slots. And if you had a particular airway, you could click, shoot, there isn't a fix in, so I can't actually show you. But let's say you had some fix in here. If you clicked on that fix, you would then see a page that displayed airways, and you could enter any airways that you might have. We don't have airways, we just have a sit and a star. So if you click on the departure field up here, you'll then see, or actually here you go. So click Los Angeles. Now if you had a specific airway to track, you could click airways and insert the airway here, and then where you end it, the waypoint at which you end. Again, we don't have airways, this is how you do it. We simply have a departure, so we'll select our departure runway, runway 24 left, and then we'll select our departure itself, which is the loop 7, and then we're on the Daggett transition, and we'll insert that. And then we'll come down here to Las Vegas, and same thing, we'll go to arrival, and we'll insert our arrival. The plan is to land on the ILS runway 1 left, so we'll select that, and then our arrival is the KPEC 3. Also, it shares a transition, the Daggett transition, and we will insert that. So now you're going to need to check your flight plan and make sure it looks good to go. You should have your charts at this point, and you should be familiar with them. And if you read the chart for the Loop 7 departure out of Los Angeles, you'll see takeoff, runways 24 left, 24 right. Climb on a 250 heading to cross the Santa Monica VOR. 160 radial, at or below 3000, and then expect radar vectors to cross the Los Angeles VOR at or above 10,000. Then, via your assigned transition or assigned route, all aircraft expect further clearance to filed flight level 3 minutes after departure. So, there's a bit of information in there. The most important thing is we're going to climb on a 250 heading, and we're going to need to cross the Santa Monica VOR at or below 5,000 feet. So, or at or below, cross the Santa Monica 160 radial, my mistake, at or below 3,000 feet. So what we can actually do in here, if we click up here on any particular fix and select fix info, we can enter a fix. So I'm going to enter the Santa Monica VOR. Now this is a little complex. This is kind of, a step up from very basic stuff, but I think you guys can handle it. So we need to enter the Santa Monica VOR into our fix here. It's the one that's 4 nautical miles away. That's the correct one. And then we need the 160 radial. And this is going to put a radial here on our ND. You can actually see it right here, this blue dashed line coming out and crossing. Here's 24 left. We're going to be departing this way, out that way. And you can see there's this radial. So we need to cross over that at or below 3,000 feet. It's incredibly, it's just there off the runway, so it won't be difficult to achieve, but just something to keep in mind when you're looking at the charts. Next, cross-check this. So we know it's a 250 heading. The plane will fly that itself. You can see it has a couple fixes here, and it will just maintain runway track. And then, ordinarily, if we were on VATSIM and had control, we would get vectors from VATSIM. We'd get a turn, and they'd tell us, turn left, direct Los Angeles VOR, proceed on course. Since we are not on VATSIM, we'll just do that ourselves. So we'll start to initiate a left-hand turn and then proceed direct here to the Los Angeles VOR. So it isn't an RNAV departure at all. You fly runway heading, and then you're given a particular, you're given a turn direct to a waypoint. So it's a little different than a pure RNAV. So you'll see a discontinuity in here. That's totally fine. You want that, in fact. You want to fly a 250 heading here. Entirely on your own. You don't want this to take you and loop you around. You want to fly that track, and you will send yourself direct. So this continuity is correct. Then you'll see, you can look at the rest of the chart. Los Angeles VOR at or above 10,000 feet. Kegs at or above 13,000 feet. Coop at or above 15,000 feet. And then we go direct to Daggett. And then we'll brief the arrival when we're up in the air for part 3. So this flight plan looks phenomenal. No issues there. If you then go to performance, remember when we calculated takeoff performance and we got a flap setting of 1, you'll enter your flap setting right here, and then you'll enter your trim. So if we slide on down, you'll see our CG is 25%. We wrote that down when we were doing the load calculation. CG 25%, which gives us an up trim of about 0.9. So we'll put 1 for flaps 1, and then do a slash and type up, 0.9, and we'll insert right here on flaps and trim. So flaps 1 with an up trim of 0.9, and it will auto-calculate our V-speeds, 125, 133, 134. Transition altitude, enter whatever the transition altitude is where you're flying. We're in the US, so it's 18,000 feet. You're good to go here. Once that's been done, I'll set the parking brake, and I'll come up to the overhead and I will start the APU. So turn on the APU master switch, turn on the APU start switch, and turn on the APU bleed. And of course, make sure your fuel pumps are on if you haven't already done that. Once that's been done, I will set the MCP here. So I'll push speed, allow the Airbus to manage its speed. I'll push heading, allow the Airbus to manage a runway heading here. And then I'll set whatever your initial climb is. Out of Los Angeles, I do air traffic control here on VATSIM. I know it's 5,000 feet. You can then turn on constraints, since there are some constraints on the departure over Los Angeles and other fixes. If you don't have constraints, you can just turn that off. We'll leave them on. And then at that point, the only thing left to do is set whatever the altimeter is. So if I look at a METAR, you'll need your METAR up. And you'll see the altimeter here at Los Angeles is 2984 at the moment. So 2984 is set, and you'll then have correct field elevation. And our pre-flight at this point is largely complete. You can see the APU is now available. So we're running on the APU. You can disconnect external power, get rid of external power, and come down here to the right-hand MCDU and go to ground services. Get rid of your external power. If you have your parking brake set, which you should, you can get rid of your wheel chocks and you can get rid of your traffic cones. And remember, you should have closed your doors at this point. So, at this point, you are ready for pushback and departure. I use GSX for pushback. You're welcome to pushback however you wish. And so you can call, I'm going to call over GSX, or you can just do Shift P or whatever you would like in order to push yourself back. So, GSX comes over to push us back properly. You can see the jetway is retracting here. And now, as you're getting ready for engine start and pushback, a couple things you want to do. Your fuel pump should be on, which they are if you're running the APU. You need to set your beacon light, which is effectively the anti-collision light, on, so people on the ground understand that you're about to start your engines. And then you should set your transponder. Now, if you're in Europe, leave this on standby. If you're in the US, which we are, give it 2 clicks so that you're mode Charlie. In the US on VATSIM, they want you to operate your transponder on mode Charlie on all taxiways and runways. In Europe, they just want you mode Charlie on the runways. So now we'll wait for their GSX to push us back, and then we can go through the engine start procedure.
Departure check completed. Live has been inserted. Release parking brakes. Commencing push. All engines clear. Start that wheel.
Okay, now for the engine start procedure. It's really quite simple. You're going to come down here. You'll see the engine control panel. On the left hand, in the middle is crank. On the left hand, or in the middle is normal. On the left hand side is crank. On the right hand side is ignition/start. You'll want it selected ignition/start, and then you'll simply flip the master switch from off to on, and the engine will start itself. You'll see here N1, N2 begin to rise. Oil pressure should begin to rise, and just make sure everything comes up stably and looks good. And when N2 here, which you can see in a gray box, when that gray box extinguishes and you just have an N2 with a black backdrop, that's when you know you've got a good start and you can start your next engine. So there, the gray box is extinguished. Good start on number 2, and you can start engine number 1. Exact same procedure here on engine number 1. Oil pressure will begin to rise, N1, N2 will begin to rise, exhaust gas temperature, EGT, will begin to rise, and the engine should come up nicely and stabilize. Another thing, you can set your standby altimeter here. So you can see 29 or 84, so we'll set 29 or 84 on the standby as well as the primary. There's a good start on engine number 1.
Set parking brakes.
So we'll set our parking brakes. Now, some quick after start flows. Your ignition switch can go back to normal in the center position. You can come up to the overhead and turn off your APU and your APU bleed. You can then arm your spoilers. Your spoilers need to be armed for takeoff, so arm your spoilers. You can click here to do it. I have a hotkey on my throttle quadrant. And then set your flaps for takeoff. In our case, we have flaps 1, so I'll set flaps 1.
Unlocking gear.
You should set your auto brake to max as well. Right here, set your auto brake to max. Come down here. Make sure your rudder trim is 0, which it is. If you wanted to, you could click this reset button and that will reset it. And then set your trim for takeoff. And ours is, we have a CG of 25%, so you need to remember that number that you wrote down from the fuel planner and set your trim. So I have a hotkey on my joystick, and I'm going to set a trim of about 25% right there.
Left is clear. Right is clear.
Once you've done that, you should check your flight controls. Make sure everything's working as it should. So if you come down here to the lower ECAM control and click flight controls, it will illuminate and you can then see your flight controls here. Check everything, make sure that they're working. So check your elevator first, full up, full down, neutral, check your ailerons, full left, full right, neutral, and then check your rudder. Full left, full right, neutral, and it looks wonderful. At this point you see takeoff config down here. Click that, and up here it will say takeoff config normal if you've set everything up properly. Auto brake max, signs on, cabin ready, spoilers armed, flaps set for takeoff, takeoff config normal. So at this point you're in really good shape and you're pretty much ready to depart. There's nothing more that needs to be done. You've turned off your APU, you've gone through the after start flows, you've checked your flight controls. So you can come up, flick your taxi light on to taxi, as would be expected, and if it was a particularly rainy, icy day and it was real cold out, after start you'd set your anti-ice if you needed to, but it's a perfectly pleasant day around Los Angeles, so we don't need anti-ice. Set your light to taxi, release your parking brakes. If you're on VATSIM, get clearance for, to taxi, and begin your taxi on out to the runway. There's no point in me showing you guys the taxi. It's just moving the aircraft, so I will bring you guys back as we're getting ready to depart. Alright guys, welcome back. So we're just approaching the runway and we're ready to depart. If you have active sky and you want to use your weather radar, you can come down here to the pedestal and click on this weather system knob, give it one click to the left to turn on your weather radar. I will do that. If you don't have weather radar, don't worry about it. Once you've turned on your weather radar, what you're going to want to do is set your transponder to TARA so that you have traffic displayed on the NDs and your TCAS is working properly. And then you're pretty much ready to go. You can go ahead and turn on your strobe light as you're entering the runway and get on your landing lights, your runway turn-off lights, and set your nose gear light here to take off. I really can't speak today. At that point, you are ready to go. You're ready to depart. So enter the runway. If you want to start the clock, you can click down here on the clock down there by run and start the clock. You certainly don't need to though. And you're set. You're ready to go. Once you've lined up, advance your throttles to roughly 50%, let them stabilize, and then advance slowly up to takeoff to man flex. Now, let me say before I depart real quick, this would be worth saying, there are detents here on the throttle quadrant of the Airbus. It's not like it's one smooth thing. There are detents. The lowest detent is idle, which is no engine thrust whatsoever other than just, the idling engines. The second detent is climb thrust, which is just that basically is a managed state where the throttle is either, if you need climb thrust, it will provide climb thrust or it will maintain a selected speed. The next detent is man flex, which is a selected flex temp, which is generally what you're going to have when you depart. And the furthest detent up is full takeoff power, which you would use if you had a very short runway or if you were going around. So when you advance the throttles, you're going to hear 2 clicks. The first is that first detent, the second is man flex. If you heard 3 clicks, you're in full takeoff power. So in our case, we have man flex. We're only going to advance until we hear 2 clicks, which would be flex takeoff power. If you wanted full takeoff power, you could advance all the way forward until you heard 3 clicks. So I know that's kind of confusing. I hope I made that as clear as I possibly could. Obviously, it's again though, it's somewhat complicated. It's different. It just takes a little time to get used to. The other thing I should mention is in the Airbus, you're going to want to push, if you have a joystick or a yoke, you're going to want to push that nose down just a little bit there. Not all the way, but about halfway, just a little less than halfway, to put a little bit of pressure on the nose gear as you roll. When you get to 80 knots, you can slowly begin to release your nose pressure back to idle. It's something I've picked up from talking to an Airbus pilot. So, without further ado, advance your throttles to 50%, put a little pressure on the nose gear. Allow them to stabilize, and then slowly advance until you hear 2 clicks. There's 1, there's 2, and you can see here on the PFD, man flex, SRS, runway, auto thrust blue. That's what you're looking for. Airspeed begins to advance, 80 knots, and slowly begin to release that pressure back to its idle state by about 100. There's V1, and there's your rotational speed. Slowly ease up on the nose. And once you have a positive rate of climb, you can call out positive rate, gear up. And just follow the flight director, aiming right for the middle of those two green crossbars, and you can now see our navigational systems engaged, nav. And then at 1500 feet, that's your acceleration height, you're going to pull your throttle quadrant back until you hear one click, which will put it into climb thrust. So at 1500 feet, you'll see man flex change to climb thrust. It'll begin to blink to indicate climb, and you'll then pull your throttles back to thrust climb thrust, and you'll see this change from thrust climb from man flex, and then you'll have open climb and heading select. Speed begins to advance. Once you get to around this yellow tick here, you'll want to bring your flaps up. So there is that yellow tick indicating we can bring our flaps up. So speed checked, flaps 0. What I'm going to do at this point is bug our altitude on up all the way to our flight level, which is 290. And I'll give that one pull. If you pushed it, it would go into a managed climb. If you pull it, it goes into an open climb. And we're just going to fly this heading until we're ready to make the turn back towards the Los Angeles VOR. And at this point, I will put in the autopilot. So a couple things. If for any of these knobs, if you give them a push, it will be managed. So right now, speed is managed. If I pulled this knob, a push is a left click, a pull is a right click. A push is managed, so a left click is managed. The plane's going to manage it based on the flight computer. A pull is selected, so if I pulled speed, I could enter a selected speed, and the plane is going to hold that hard and fast. If I pushed heading, it would be a managed heading, meaning based on the flight computer, it's going to fly a particular heading. If I pulled it, which is currently what it's doing, it's going to fly the selected heading. Same for altitude. If I push it, it will manage the altitude based on the flight system, based on the MCDU, the flight computer. If I pull it, it's going to get up to that altitude at its best rate of climb. So it'll hold that hard and fast. So at this point, we can start to make a left-hand turn back towards the Los Angeles VOR. So we'll do that ourselves, wind this all the way around, basically 180 degrees. And we'll come down into the MCDU, the flight computer here, go to direct, which will send us direct to Los Angeles. So direct to Los Angeles, and you will then insert that direct to, and the plane will begin to turn, and it should take us direct to Los Angeles. If we zoom out a little bit here on the ND, you can see it's going to take us right there. Just now coming through 10,000 feet, we can put away our landing lights, our turnoffs, and our nose gear light. You need your strobe, your beacon, and your nav and your logo on for the entirety of the flight. This bottom panel can come off though at 10K. And also our speed begins to increase as we're through our speed restriction at 10,000 feet. And you can now see, remember how I was saying when you pull this knob, it's going to be a selected heading. Now that we inserted a direct to, so we're going direct to Los Angeles VOR, that heading disappears and it just becomes blanked out basically, which means we're now, instead of a selected heading, we're in a managed heading, which means it's tracking a particular track or heading based on the information that's in the MCDU or the flight computer. And again, see, I just pushed that. So if I pull this, it's going to go open climb. You can see right here. I gave that a pull and it selects open climb. If I give this a push, it's just going to go into climb, which is a managed climb, meaning it's going to hit all of the altitude restrictions listed here. The only thing left to do at this point is reset our altimeter to standard passing through our transition altitude, which is 18,000 feet. So again, let me try and explain because this is something that people are confused about. If you see the speed heading blanked out, it is managed, meaning whatever's in the flight computer, whatever's being directed by the flight computer, it's going to rely entirely on that. If you see a particular speed, if you pull this knob out instead of pushing it and you see a particular speed or you see a particular heading, it is going to fly that hard and fast. It's not going to rely on what's in the flight computer, the MCDU. It's going to select the speed that you've entered. It's going to select the heading that you've commanded. As far as the altitude goes, if you have a dot next to this here, it is managed, meaning it is flying, climbing and hitting certain altitudes based upon information in the MCDU and the flight computer. That dot is there when you push this. When you pull it, that dot's going to disappear and it's just going to list an altitude. 1 second, let me pull standard. So if you give a right click here and pull standard, it will set standard on the altimeter since we're through 18,000 feet. If you pull this, that dot will disappear and it's going to go into an open climb, meaning it's not worried about what's in the MCDU, it's not worried about what's in the flight computer, it is only worried about hitting the altitude that you have selected here at its best rate of climb. So, we're through a transition altitude, we're off and away, on our way to Las Vegas. See top of climbs coming up shortly. So, this will conclude part 2 of the How to Fly the Airbus series. It's, cold and dark startup, departure, climb out, up to cruise. So I hope this was useful. I hope you guys enjoyed part 2, and I will see you all shortly, shortly for me, for part 3 as we're getting ready to plan for our descent and descend down into Las Vegas. So long.